WOW VIPers, and welcome to a Monday afternoon update. Not going to keep you very long today, but I just wanted to cover a few things just to try to, again, tell you some things that are curated, some things that you can trust, some things that you know apply to you on a daily basis given this COVID-19 craziness that's going on. My hope is that we're winning the war. As the president says, this is indeed a war. So we're having to take extraordinary circumstances and extraordinary precautions, things that we wouldn't normally do. So I want to take just a few minutes today and give you just a brief update, talk about a couple of things related to COVID-19 that you may not be hearing a whole lot about, and then talk a little bit about our viral spiral, our program to turn this into a transformational event, one that you'll come through in a much better place once we get through all this. The first thing I wanted to do is give you some accurate updates of some numbers from Georgia and also from local, because I think it's important to keep that in perspective so you understand not just the national and international, but the local picture, which is very, very important to all of us, obviously. To date, this is as of noon today from the Georgia Department of Health. We've had 772 positive tests for confirmed cases for COVID-19 in the state of Georgia, and that's 25 deaths, and that number has been steady for a couple of days now. What is fascinating as you break down some of these statistics is that in the state of Georgia, 59%, almost 60% of the positive tests were in 18 to 59-year-olds. I think that's a very, very interesting statistic, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. The reason that is so important is that these are the people that are testing positive, but these are also the people who tend to have either asymptomatic or very minimal symptoms. And that's a good thing. But the bad thing is that these people are also very likely to be transmissible agents. These are folks who may have mild symptoms or maybe even no symptoms at all, and they can not be participating in the social isolation like they should, or they may be involved in essential workplace activities where they have to be present, but they don't know they're symptomatic. And they can actually spread this virus. So this concept that young people are not affected is just a myth. They're not affected seriously. They don't have the same comorbidities as a lot of older individuals have. But indeed, they are important because they can be vectors. They can be agents of transmission. So it's absolutely critical for this cohort of individuals, this 18 to 59-year-olds, to know that they actually right now in Georgia have the highest rate of positive tests of any age group. Now, just to put that in perspective again for you, there's been about 5,070 tests done in Georgia. That's a combination of out of private labs and the Georgia Department of Health. And there's been about 772 positives, as we noted. Now, what's important there, which you don't often hear about in those statistics, is that that's only a 15% positive rate. And just remember, the groups that are being tested at this point are by far the most likely individuals to actually test positive because they're symptomatic. They're first responders, they're healthcare workers, they're patients in nursing homes. So the majority of tests in the state of Georgia are still being done on what we would consider high-risk populations, individuals actually presenting with symptoms. And even so, only 15% are turning out positive. I look on that as being something that's encouraging. It's certainly way too early to be getting our hopes up that we're anywhere near past this. But what it does tell us is that the rate of infection may not be as rapid or as high as we initially thought. it still is absolutely critical that people do the social isolating, because that's going to really flatten this curve more than anything else. To date, and again, this is as of noon today, this is Monday the 23rd, there have been 20 positive cases in the CSRA area. That's Richmond, Columbia, and Aiken counties. So there's been 20 cases. Now, of course, we are going to see this number rise. There's no way around that. As we start more aggressive testing, as we start looking and testing individuals who are minimally symptomatic, we're going to see this number rise. The number you really want to pay attention to is the mortality rate. Now, why is that the number that you really want to pay attention to? Because that's what's going to tell you much more accurately about the virulence of this virus. Because as the number of tests go up, the number of positive tests are not that critical in the overall picture. It's that ratio of positive tests to the actual death rate. That's what's going to tell you where the problem arises, and is the problem getting better, is it stabilizing, or is it getting worse? It's not so much the number of infections, it's the ratio of the people who are severely ill and actually die from the virus as it compares to the number of people being tested. As that volume, that numerator, if you will, of people who are being tested remarkably expands, which it will, yes, of course, we're going to see more positives. But what you really want to look at and pay special attention to is that mortality ratio. That's going to be the sign as to when this thing is going to begin to plateau and begin to lessen, as we see that those numbers eventually go down. So that's just the update from a numbers standpoint. I want to again stress that it is absolutely critical to be very compliant with the social distancing. We're doing that in our office. Many of you know who are our patients. We have only kept the office open for prenatal patients. So if you are a pregnant woman and have an appointment of our office, we're limiting that from 8 till noon. So if you are symptomatic, if you are a pregnant woman and are symptomatic, please call first. Talk to us about whether or not you should come into the office or whether we should direct you to get tested otherwise. We're only seeing GYN patients for emergencies, but we're very much encouraging all of our patients to utilize the telemedicine portal that we have set up. And again, I'm placing how to achieve those, how to set that appointment with the video here. So, and this is not just for weight loss or weight or GYN complaints. Literally, it could be for any problem that you're having. Now, I will tell you, and this came up the other day, you need to be a current patient in Women's Health of Augusta's practice to be able to utilize this telemedicine portal. That's just the restrictions that we have. We can't, without having seen someone in the office as a patient, then the telemedicine ability is not extended with regards to prescribing medications or diagnosing a medical issue. Now, we can give you advice, and we certainly don't mind doing that. So if you are not a patient in our practice and just need to talk to somebody, need to talk to a physician, I'm happy to do that as well as other people in my practice. So don't hesitate to get in touch with you. We're here for you. We're here to meet your needs. So feel free with any issue that you might have, whether you're a patient or not, to use the telemedicine portal, set up an appointment, and we can really address whatever concerns and needs that you might have. I wanted to touch base a little bit on something else that we're not getting a lot of in the media, and that's what we're seeing now is a rise in the number of gastrointestinal symptoms that people are presenting with or people are developing as they're exposed to this virus. Things like lack of appetite, diarrhea, abdominal pain, vomiting, Those are things that we normally don't associate with this virus, but some of the studies coming out of China are now showing that about 48% of people who eventually test positive for COVID-19 actually have substantial GI problems. And what we're also seeing, and this is very important, is that people who have a lot of gastrointestinal problems associated with this virus tend to have a worse prognosis. We don't really know why that is. They tend to have more complications. It may be just that these types of symptoms tend to present later in the course of the disease. So by the time someone has GI complaints, even if they don't have the respiratory complaints, oftentimes there's speculation that the virus may have replicated in a greater number. So just keep in mind, and again, don't want to raise any unnecessary apprehension. If there's any confusion, please call your primary care or call the university number hotline or the AU hotline, and we put those numbers up and they're everywhere. Also, you can call us and do the telemedicine with us. And also, please keep in mind, you've got to contextualize this. Please understand that there are so many other things that can cause these symptoms. Just as there's so many things that can cause flu-like symptoms, congestion, cold, other viral type symptoms that are not COVID-19, the same thing applies to these gastrointestinal symptoms. Certainly, the anorexia feeling, the lack of hunger, the GI complaints, the diarrhea, the abdominal pain, there's a multitude of things that can cause that. So I'm not saying that to raise any unnecessary anxiety. I'm simply trying to inform you that that is a potential presenting complaint. Now, why is that? And I don't want to dive too deeply into the physiology, but you guys are smart. You're all a smart bunch, and you want to know the answers to that. Well, this virus attaches to a receptor on a cell called an ACE2 inhibitor, an ACE2 receptor on the cell. And it affects the lungs because there's a bunch of those receptors in the lungs. So that's why this virus is particularly damaging into the lung, because it's got more. Think of it as the virus has a key and this receptor on a normal lung cell is a lock. Well, there's just a lot of locks on these cells in the lungs. So there's, by nature, a lot of these keys that'll fit in there and let that virus in and let it replicate. Well, there happens to be these locks in other body tissues also, like the gastrointestinal tract, the stomach, the bowels, the intestines. So that's why you can see some GI effects from this virus. There's also some of these receptors in the heart muscle, and now there's evidence that some people could present with particular cardiovascular problems. So it makes sense. The more we learn about this, the more we get data from places like China and Italy who have experienced these events, the more information we can kind of pass on to you guys to let you know what to watch for. You know, I was talking to my financial advisor the other day, like probably I'm sure a lot of you guys have, and we were discussing the similarities in between how people are viewing the financial issues associated with this and the medical issues. Obviously, there's many differences, but there's many similarities. And he said something that was very profound and really makes sense both from a financial side and from a medical side. And that is, panic is not a good financial strategy. And he was referring to the panic selling that goes on whenever the market drops. And that really applied medically also. Panic is not a good medical strategy. The best medical strategy is listening to people who know what they're talking about, and that's largely the medical scientists who are on the front lines of this. I hate to say it, it's not the politicians, and there's a few very prominent politicians, by the way, that I've been very upset with recently with some of the tweets, especially as it relates to medications like hydroxychloroquine. But that's for another day. I did a previous Facebook Live yesterday, I think, on hydroxychloroquine. But listen to the medical experts. They don't have an agenda. Their agenda is your well-being. It's not getting reelected or worrying about what this vote would be or what that would be. So God bless them. They've got to do what they have to do to help with all this situation. But listen to the people who know what they're talking about. That being said, he told me another story which I thought was very appropriate. Or actually, I told him this story, and we were kind of relating it to the financial world. Is that I was listening to a podcast, and a fella who had trained as a Buddhist monk. That tells you a little bit about some of the podcasts I'm listening to these days. But he told the story about a Buddhist teacher who was walking along with several of his students, and he looked out and he saw a big, huge boulder sitting there, and he asked the students if that boulder looked heavy, if that boulder was heavy. And the students, thinking it was just a trick question, just thought, well, yes, I'll reply that it probably is heavy. And he looked at them and said, well, it's only heavy until you try to lift it. And I thought about that for a second, and I said, well, that really applies to some of the financial woes. People complain about all the money they've lost in their 401ks and all the stress that they're getting from watching the stock market bomb. But the reality is you really haven't lost anything until you sell it. So there's a certain strategy, and again, I'm not a financial advisor and don't think for any stretch that this is financial advice, but I'm just tying this back into the medical part of it, is that there's a perception, and that perception is a decision you make in your own mind. You can make a decision as to what you're going to do with this crisis. Is it going to be something that is going to define you, or is it going to be something that's going to provide an opportunity for you to move forward? We talked about the viral spiral the other day, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can go back and look at that video. But just in summary, we think of spiral as someone spiraling downward. Well, we're reversing that, and we're talking about how we can take this and spiral upwards to new heights to transform our lives into something better than it was from this moment on. And we talked about 3 action steps. One was take care of you and your family. Number 2 was do an act of kindness, 1 a day at least, for somebody. And number 3 is be able to use this as a transformational moment to make yourself better than you were before. I wanted to just briefly touch on the very first part of that, and that's take care of you. And we'll talk about your family also, but really take care of you. And I kind of see 4 steps to doing that, and 4 simple ways to doing that. Number 1 is you've got to take care of both the body and the mind. You can't forget about this concept of mind, body, and spirit, that we're a 3-legged stool, that if your body is doing great but you're emotionally distraught, that stool's going to fall over. And the same thing applies to your emotional well-being. If you're stressed and you're anxious, it's going to affect your physical well-being. So the goal is to look at that big picture. What can you do to balance that mind, body, and spirit to provide true wellness, not just the absence of disease? We know by far the best immunization against the coronavirus is being in a good state of health mentally, physically, and spiritually. Second thing is being a forward-looking mindset. There's absolutely no benefit at this stage to looking backwards, to laying blame, to say, what could have we done? I get so upset at some of these reporters who are asking in these news conferences, well, what should have been done? What could we have done differently? It doesn't matter. There'll be time for assessing that later. What we want to focus on now is where are we going? And I'm really talking to you about individually, about your life. Where are you going? What are you going to do? Not today. It's like, don't ask the question, why me? Why is this happening to us right now? The real question is, what now? That's the question you want to ask. Not why, but what now? What can I do? as an individual, as a part of a family, as a part of a community. What can I do to make this a transformational experience? And it begins with your thoughts. Your thoughts become your actions become your habits become your deeds become your character, and your character becomes your legacy. We're setting the stones today for the legacy of the future, and the decisions and the choices we make today will determine that legacy for yourself, your family, and your community. But it all starts up here. It all starts with a thought. It all starts with a positive decision that you're going to be well. You're going to do what it takes to keep your family well, and that you're going to learn what it will be to make yourself transformed through this crisis. So how do you do that? Well, you sit down and you take the time to think about it. Now we all have more time than we probably had before. Many of us have never had this much time at any given point in our careers. So we have more time now to sit down and make use of. And how do you do that? Well, you sit down and I'm going to make an immediate plan, I'm going to make a short-term plan, and I'm going to make a long-term plan. And that can apply to anything. That can apply to your business. It could apply to your health. It could apply to your relationships. Virtually any aspect of your life. It goes back again to this balance. You have to consider all those things. But without a plan, you don't know where you're going. It's like someone taking a flight, back when people took flights, from here to Los Angeles. You have the flight plan. You know where you're going. If you don't know where you're going and you don't know where you're starting from, that flight plan is very difficult to follow. But the other thing to remember, especially during these times where things change so rapidly, is that you talk to any pilot and they'll tell you they're never exactly on that flight plan. They're constantly making adjustments. They're reacting to the weather, to the wind, the air pressure, all the different things that can influence how they progress. Well, the same thing's going to happen when you write these immediate and short-term and long-term plans. You have to have a goal, but you have to be flexible enough to shift and veer depending on the conditions. But again, without that first goal, without that knowing where you're headed, you're just drifting in the wind. So that's my challenge, is to utilize this time to come up with that immediate, short-term, and long-term plan. And then finally, we've got to stay connected. One of the most devastating events for people in older ages is loneliness, is being alone, is being isolated. There's actually a correlation between people who are more isolated and who have a higher rate of mortality. And certainly in this day and time where you've got a lot of different tools to utilize to stay connected, we need to make the most of that. And we're trying to do that with our telemedicine. I'm trying to do that with these Facebook Lives. But I want to really maximize that in this community in particular. But I want to do it in a way that's positive. I want to do it in a way that this doesn't become just a scary place to show up. So what I challenge you to do, and what I'd like you to do, is I'd like you to take a couple of minutes and post on here things that you're doing that are positive, that's going to either create a better scenario for you, your family, or the community. Something that you're doing, something that you know another person is doing. It can be very personal. Again, this is a private community, so you don't have to worry about this being broadcast all over Facebook. But I want to use this as a forum to not only let other people know what's going on in your life and in this community that's positive, that's a silver lining to all this craziness. It may spark some ideas. It may provide some synergism where someone sees what you're doing and says, wow, yeah, that's something I can really support. It might give someone another idea for a way to generate income when they're off for these 2, 3, 4 weeks. Or maybe they've lost their job and they're looking for some way in this new environment to find a way to generate income. So I want this forum to be something that really turns into a positive collection of ideas, a celebration of how we can take this time and really transform our lives. So I want you to either post in the under this video, or just make separate postings of things that you see going on in your own life or in the community that will give others hope, will bind us to community, will help us to understand that we're in this together, and it will provide positive information that we can feed on, that we can nourish ourselves with as we all continue on this challenge. We're all in this together. I think that's the thing that this community to me is so meaningful, is that we're in this together. This provides a certain cohesiveness that we don't have when we're socially isolated, when we're having to stay away. This isn't the best. Obviously, it'd be much better to be face to face, but quite honestly, it's the best we got right now. So I encourage you to use this forum in that way. I think it will just provide an additional benefit to already a great bunch of folks. And I really do love you guys. It really has been wonderful. And I'm speaking personally, for me to every day have a chance to interact and to read your comments. And if you write a comment, I'm trying to respond, and I certainly read every comment and trying to respond in some way, just so you know that I appreciate what you're doing, and I know other members on the community also appreciate that. And especially if we can use this as a tool to present some positive insight into all this that's going on. It might just be one little bright spot, and gosh, we can use all the bright spots we can get right now. So with that, I appreciate you. I took a little bit longer time than I anticipated. I appreciate all those folks who stuck with us here. I'm going to try to do this every day and hit on updates and topics. Again, if you have people, family members, friends. We had a couple of new members today join from California. We've had some folks from Brazil. We've had some folks from Iceland. So, if you've got people that are in your community, in your sphere, that you feel might benefit from learning about women's health, and in particular, as we go through this trying time, maybe some extra little bit of spark of joy, be sure you submit their name, and we'd love to have them to be a part of this. So until next time, and again, let me encourage you, if you've got some questions, I can't really read, there we go. Now I can read some of these things. It was scrolling funny. Hey, April and Judy and Rita and Trishi and Joanne and Trina and Margaret and Sheila and Tina. Gosh, I love all you guys being on here. It really means a lot to me, and I really appreciate you taking the time, Gail and Carol and Buffy. I really do appreciate you guys taking the time to be a part of this. So I really want this to be a beacon of hope. I know that sounds pretty pretty magnanimous, but we've got to latch on to whatever we have. And in this era of separation, this could be our community. This could be our touch point. This could be our way to stay in touch and to really support and encourage many of you who I know are having difficult times. And that's what we're here to do, to support that, to provide you the medical knowledge. That's what I can do. But I know there's a lot of people out there who can give other gifts, and that's really what we're here for, and that's what it's all about. So until next time, submit any questions you might have, any concerns you might have, and I'll try to address those as often as I can. I promise to be with you to try to give you the straight skinny about what's happening with this virus, and more importantly, how you can grow, how you can protect your family, how you can turn this into something that you'll look back on 10 years from now, 5 years from now, and say, that's when things changed. And that's when things changed for the better. That's when I realized I had to take care of myself. I had to take care of my family. I turned over a new leaf. Whatever silly metaphor you want to use. I took that first step on that 1,000-mile journey. Whatever it takes, that's my goal for you, is for you to look back onto this and say, dadgummit, that's when it started, and look how far I've come. Until next time, make healthy choices.